Hey team, welcome back to the PATHIRED podcast, where we explore the workforce development ecosystem, highlight non-traditional career journeys, and bring you insights from those shaping the future of work. I'm your host, Daisy Saulls, and I'm excited for today's conversation. So, in our last episode, we spoke with Nancy Ivanko from Loudoun Economic Development, who shared some of the top interests and priorities businesses in Loudoun County, Virginia have when it comes to workforce development. So let's take a quick listen. What are you seeing are the biggest asks right now from small businesses and some of our larger businesses in Loudoun County?
That's a really great question. And I think it comes down to a couple of things. One is marketing. It's essential in order to, one, attract direct talent. So that whole piece around what is my brand, what is my mission, what is my vision, how do people understand me, how do they find me, how do I get my message out in the way that I want to make sure that's true, I think, to the organization. So I think that's always a big piece from workforce development. I think so much, whether I'm talking to a large business or a small business, it really centers around programs.
One of the most common topics businesses are eager to explore is how to effectively promote their programs and initiatives. How do you reach the right people, attract top talent, and build a strong employer brand? That's why today's episode is so timely. Marketing isn't just about visibility. It's a key component of workforce development, in my opinion. And to help us unpack this, I'm joined by Brian Tinsman, marketing strategist and co-founder of POUNCE Solutions. Brian has a proven track record of helping brands elevate their visibility with key audiences. As the former lead storyteller for the Washington Commanders, Brian honed the art of engagement and has since then helped organizations across industries like government and nonprofit build meaningful relationships with their audiences and inspire action. More recently, Brian led marketing communications for Loudoun Economic Development, where he helped the county become a leader in workforce development. In 2021, his efforts helped Loudoun Economic Development earn the prestigious EDO of the Year award from the International Economic Development Council. Now, as a co-founder of POUNCE Solutions, Brian helps organizations craft compelling narratives, increase their visibility, and drive business success. It's a mission that's earned POUNCE Solutions the Loudoun Chamber's 2024 Virtual Small Business of the Year award. In this episode, Brian will share both macro and micro insights on how brands can better market to their target workforce, and how morale and communication issues may be impacting hiring and retention. I truly believe that this is one of the most valuable conversations when it comes to designing successful workforce development programs, because no matter how impactful your initiatives are, if people don't know about them, they can't engage. So let's dive in. Hey, welcome, Brian. Thanks so much for being here with us today.
Hey, Daisy, this is awesome. I really appreciate you having me on.
Well, I am excited to talk with you about workforce development and just your experience within the ecosystem. I know you've got a wealth of knowledge from multiple different sides of this. So I've always enjoyed having this conversation with you and look forward to just another great conversation that we can share with our listeners.
Absolutely, yeah. I probably have a little bit of a different perspective on workforce development, not coming at it necessarily from an HR side or a legal side or even really just the management side. To me, there's such a deeper level of communication and just, the human connection that comes with it. So I'm excited to talk about all of the ways in which those kind of interact there.
And I think that that's really what we want to learn from is just how it shows up from different perspectives. So again, I appreciate you being here. So let's get started with you sharing just a little bit about yourself and your career and your work at Pounce, and then also just, your interaction in that workforce development ecosystem and how you've been able to see things work and not work so well, and share your insights with us.
Yeah, I've had an interesting workforce story myself, and it's probably what has led me to have a real interest in it. So I'm Brian. I'm a storyteller by nature, and I've managed to turn that into a career of helping organizations kind of figure out what is their brand story. And I know that when you throw big terms out there, if you're not in the marketing and branding space, that can sound like a lot. But it's basically, how do you interact with people? And I saw a great definition of that, more as it relates to kind of workforce culture and stuff like that. But, your brand is not your logo and your font. It's not how you put even really how you put yourself out there and the story that you're trying to tell. It's how people feel about their job on Sunday night. And I thought that was such a great way to describe it, because particularly in sort of a tight job market that we've been in for years and years in Northern Virginia, but I think even nationally at the moment, what that means is that there are lots of factors involved with that. There's lots of generational differences and kind of the way that we approach work and the way that we think about those things. But whatever all of those factors add up to, the reality is at the end of the day that if your workforce is not excited to come to work, if they're having the Sunday scaries, then there's going to be a cost to be paid for that at some point. You're either going to lose them, you're going to lose productivity in the meantime, and different things like that. So I think as it relates to workforce development, the most important story is not even the one being told by the brand. It's the one that's believed by the people and is shared with their friends and family as well. That doesn't give you a whole lot to work with as a brand or a management or a business leader or anything like that. But the reality is that you can help and shape that, and you can be very intentional about that process.
So what are some of the ways that you've seen it done successfully where you're helping to shape that process?
Sure. So I have a couple of different perspectives on this. I'll talk about the most recent kind, which is really working one-on-one with organizations and business leaders. And so that's sort of the micro. I've also had an opportunity to work in economic development and really help Loudoun County, Virginia, where I live, launch their workforce development program with Nancy Ivanko and Buddy Reiser and that whole team over there. So I've seen it from both sort of the ecosystem side as well as one-on-one, sitting around a boardroom table with executive leadership. And I really enjoy the hands-on process. Building up the ecosystem, talking about things on a big level is great, but when you're actually sitting down and problem solving with leaders, that's really where I find the most fun in the job. And it's also where I think you can drive the most impact. Again, there's only so much that can be attributed to the ecosystem. At the end of the day, it really is the workforce experience. So I won't share names, but I've had the opportunity to work with some really large organizations. So, we're talking 750 plus employees. And when we were first approached, POUNCE Solutions, provides marketing communication support for mission-driven organizations. And so they were certainly a mission-driven organization. They came to us and said, hey, we're having issues with hiring. We can't hire the people that we need. And so that's always a little bit of a, well, what do you mean by that conversation? And so in kind of peeling back the layers of the onion there, you realize that, okay, yes, you are having, if you want to look at marketing as a silo, then you can say, yes, you are having trouble. The advertising dollars that you're putting towards something, the number of impressions that you have, the number of clicks through to your website, the number of people who start their application forms. Yes, all of these things should be leading to more applicants. So from a in a marketing silo, you do have a marketing problem. But the reality is that what they actually have and are still working through is something that's much deeper. And so that really leads back to, peeling more and more layers of the onion back. Conducting not only surveys of the workforce that's there, but also individual interviews where we're one-on-one with them, promising that anything that is said, is kept, between them and me and these four walls. It's a really interesting process to learn what are the underlying issues. Why is it that nobody wants this job? What is it that is, causing the attrition in the current workforce that you have, but also not causing the people who work there to go tell their friends that, hey, you should apply for this job. That particular organization was down 20% of their workforce at the time. So yes, they did have a big marketing problem, but when we actually got in to diagnose what the issues were, it was a lot more to do with workforce safety was an issue. One of the things that can happen when an organization starts to lose people is that anyone who's been in a situation like that, the rest of the team picks up the slack. And so there were issues with people being entirely overworked, being forced to overwork, that it was mandatory overtime and things like that. So there were a lot of issues that could be then brought to executive leadership because the hierarchy of the organization was too tall. The people at the bottom who were bearing the brunt of the issues were not able to communicate all the way up the chain. So, in that case, it was good for a consultant like Pounce to come in and take that message and hand deliver it. And let me tell you, that's an uncomfortable conversation when you do take it to the boardroom and say, this is how your staff feels. This is why they feel it. And I think if you kind of look in your heart of hearts, you know that they have a point. So let's always deal in realities when it's that conversation. But yeah, what they thought was really a marketing issue was an internal morale issue and an internal communications issue. And that was something that we were able to use a combination of very intentional communication. So that's very much on the tactical side, but put strategies in place where communication can flow much more freely up and down the chain of command, where we can make the best use of modern technology to expedite the process, when feedback is given, that it is received and responded to right away. So, again, we're still working through to the point where we can be more effective in our marketing on behalf of that organization. However, in the meantime, I do feel like we've been able to solve some of the core issues at the heart of it. And then you just kind of work your way back out to a point where, when it really comes to brand storytelling, that's fundamental change. It's not, again, going through and changing the name, changing the logo, changing the colors. None of that changes the people. And that's really, I think, at the heart of it, what workforce development always comes back to is how do you interact with your people?
So well said. I think this is why I was so excited to have you on the show today, because it mirrors a lot of how I like to approach workforce development as well, in terms of it being a system, right? Even an internal system, because in order to make it successful, you have to have the right marketing in place. But in order to make marketing, work and being successful, to your point, it's so important to understand what's going on within your organization. And what are some of those things that are going to drive successful marketing campaigns or successful, workforce development campaigns? So I think that was so well said. And I think it's a great opportunity for organizations to really consider that when they're thinking about workforce strategies, and how it really does align with their corporate strategies. It's also tying into public relations and community engagement. And if the community doesn't have a positive view or even any knowledge of your industry, it's going to be really difficult to get that ball moving, in terms of these campaigns. So I love the picture that you painted here in terms of this process and where, to start peeling back those layers of the onion. And so a lot of what you do, it sounds like you're doing a lot of work with corporate strategy as well.
Yes. So, I think we're if I were to explain Pounce, it is a marketing firm, consultancy, but so much of marketing really touches the other spokes of the wheel within an organization. So, just within that example, with that case study, we were working very closely with legal and HR. And as you mentioned, the public relations apparatus that they had and management, up and down the chain of command, all throughout their operations to really understand. And one of the things that was very true in that case, but I think is true always, I'll put my name to this one, is that it's always the little stuff. And it's the little inconveniences that just sort of chip away at people over time. And I think it's the little bonuses, and I don't mean bonus in any sort of financial sense, or it can be as simple as saying hello to somebody in the morning. Quite literally, those are the little things that just add up for people. They either nag at you or they build you up and make you feel like you could work here for the rest of your life. And when you're looking at some of the trying to diagnose what are the priorities here, it's very hard to include, within your list of top priorities, like, hey, the guys don't want to have to shave every day. It would be nice if the girls didn't have to, I guess in that particular example, it had something to do with, the hairstyles based on the industry that they were in and things like that. And, having those real conversations with management to either say, is this a preference or is this a real safety concern? And it turned out that in both of those cases, there was a real safety concern. And I said, that's fine. But understand that they just need to understand that they think it's arbitrary, that they don't believe that this is in their own best interest. They think it's just something that you come along and need to see that their boots are polished and, that's that. What is the real reason behind that? And then just make sure that you're communicating that to people. That so much of this, consternation and dissatisfaction in the workforce, in the workplace, can really be solved by just leaning in and communicating, making sure that people are heard, making sure that you are receiving feedback and explaining why. Because I would say that particularly within hierarchical organizations where you might be pretty far removed from frontline staff, you need to make sure that they understand that they are the activation of the mission right there. And no matter how much you appreciate them in a room of your peers and superiors, they need to make sure that they are really tied in with the successes of the organization and are executing on all of that. So it's such an interesting conversation anytime you get into an organization, but you really do need to go deep and be willing to look yourself in the mirror, to understand why people are either enthusiastic and things are going in a good direction, or that there is dissension and things are slipping away. I'm a big believer in momentum in that way.
So I like that because, I think a lot of organizations are balancing a lot of different stakeholders and a lot of different goals. And so from my discussions with different organizations, it can be a bit overwhelming to tackle which one of these areas they want to focus resources on. For example, if, they know that they need to attract new talent and they need to create workforce development streams, they may have funding for that. But then when it's identified that they also have, maybe an internal issue for retention, or the company culture may need some assistance in itself, that now becomes, more resources that are needed in order to tackle this emergent need sometimes. So what, from your perspective, is the return on investment? I have my thoughts on this, but from your perspective, what is the return on investment to be able to dedicate resources to the system that feeds a successful workforce development initiative?
Wow. So I could take that in a couple of different directions, but the number one thing that I'll say is that if you are trying to prioritize, because I think a lot of organizations are facing that, where they have both a retention and an attraction and development issue. I think, just sort of like a first responder, I was a lifeguard, so I get it. But the thing that they teach you in coming up on an emergency is the first thing you do is stop the bleeding. You have to triage first. And so the issue is first and foremost to get the people to stop leaving and to help them. It's, there's nothing, that you can really do from a top down perspective, but truly and sincerely from a bottom up, perspective, make sure that people feel welcome and fulfilled in the work that they do. Those are the people who go out and tell their friends about job opportunities at their office. And I think this is one of the things that, if there's a modern trend, that I think has hit millennials and probably all future generations, maybe even Gen X as well, is that I think part of sort of the combination of the rat race culture and people living their lives out online is that you don't have to wonder where your friend works. You know where your friend works. And if your friend goes somewhere and leaves in 6 months, you have questions for them. These are not the idle conversations that you might have had, periodically with a friend. You can see it play out in real time. And you can know that, hey, they had a horrible experience working somewhere, or they loved their job and then they left. And so there's always going to be questions associated with that. So again, when employers are thinking about their brand or their marketing or any of those things, these are the people who are your messengers out in the community. And so I think, again, how your current and former employees feel about you as an employer, is your brand, plain and simple. It does not get more complicated than that. People will always trust their friends, and And even it doesn't even have to be anybody that you know. If somebody says that their cousin's friend worked somewhere and they had a bad time, that's going to stick with you. So I think people need to understand the humanness of workforce development and always put that first. So if you are prioritizing, make sure that you are fixing the internal culture first, solving for some of those retention issues, and then dedicating the resources to attraction. Because if you're bringing people in and onboarding them into a bad situation, they're not going to stay and they're not going to make the problem any better. You're just essentially kind of running through more talent that again could be successful and could stick with your organization long term. So I always say, if there is an ROI issue or, resources are limited as they are for every organization, that's really where it needs to focus. The other piece of it, and I've seen this play out a few times in just sort of coming into a conversation that has been ongoing in within an organization for a while, is you really need to have all of or as many of the stakeholders internally at the table as possible. Workforce development is such a cross-disciplinary, it's an unsiloable conversation because so many departments and teams and different aspects of leadership need to weigh in on this and buy into this. Like this has to be something that you live. This is not a mission statement that's printed on the wall. This is how you interact with your staff. And so it becomes a really interesting conversation. And you can tell when an organization wants to just sort of silo this. They put together, a team that never meets on these topics, or they gather feedback and never do anything with it. The reality is that you need everyone who is going to either have a say in this or be executing on whatever you decide the workforce development strategy is going to be. And they need to be bought in on this. You need to ask them for their honest feedback and then really think about how to use that. So I could probably wax on that for a little bit, but that is super duper important. If it's something that you want to check the box or just, create a crank team to think about, but not do anything with, you're going to make the situation worse instead of better.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And I think that there's a lot of really great pieces there to walk away with and also to talk further about. But I know we've chatted a little bit about some of the challenges and there are quite a few challenges, especially right now as the workforce is changing. There's a sort of tug of war happening between employees and employers. And then there's just a lot of shifts that are occurring right now with the direction that we're going in terms of workforce. But what are some of the most innovative solutions that you've seen organizations, try out, whether successful or not? And if they weren't successful, what do you think would have made them successful?
Great question. So I'll also say, just a little bit more about my background and probably why I look for things in the places that I do. I actually got my start in marketing communications in the National Football League. And so I had that perspective where all eyes are on you. You don't have to do anything to get people to care. And from a workforce, that's a whole other conversation about the team that I worked for. But workforce development in that world is really interesting. It tends to burn through people really quickly, because it's just, it's high stress, it's high impact. Again, a lot of attention on you. But that is really interesting. So I still find some inspiration in that world, in the pro sports world, because again, those are very successful companies at the end of the day, regardless of how you feel about them or how they interact with their fans and employees and things like that. At the end of the day, they are very successful corporations. So one thing I would just give to business owners and organizational leaders is find your inspiration anywhere that it exists. The reason I bring up pro sports is because baseball, another multi-billion-dollar industry, Major League Baseball, has for years gone really. And you talk about the tug of war between employers and employees, has always managed to get value out of their youngest players for nothing, for as little as they can possibly pay them. And so quite literally, you have players in the minor leagues who make probably less than minimum wage given everything that is asked of them. And And you could have somebody who a few years later is making, $8, 10, $20 million a year. So it really is, the haves and the have-nots within baseball are really interesting. The reason I bring that up, when they're in the minors, they're working their way through. Ideally, they don't stay in a minor league town very long. So there's 3 or 4 different levels of the system as they play. And the idea is just to test them against harder competition. If they succeed and are doing amazing, they get promoted, sort of like any job. But the idea is that there's no time for them to come in and sign a lease somewhere. And there's no money in their contract for them to even stay at an extended stay hotel. Like that would be too expensive. So the way that minor league teams have operated for a long time, and I think minor league sports are such a great microcosm of like intense creativity. As an organization, there's a lot of lessons that can be taken there. But one of the things that they've done is that they work very closely with the community, and they have fans. They have super fans like anybody else. And especially for empty nesters, it's a great deal. Particularly if you have, an apartment attached to your house or something like that, but even if you have a spare bedroom, and you're willing to dedicate the space to that, if you have an extra car, that your kid left behind and you're willing to leave that to the player to use, then you're a great candidate to be, sort of the team family. And, I think that you kind of see this play out in like the movie Bull Durham. It's a very different setting there. Not suggesting that's the same thing, but the concept is kind of out there in the broader culture that, listen, these guys come in, they're here for a very short amount of time. Hopefully they play really well and keep going, but they get to stay with families while they're there. And so I have actually recommended that it takes the right situation. So I don't think a business can necessarily benefit from this necessarily, but there are some options that we'll get into in a minute. I do think that this is ripe for certain types of government jobs, and I would specifically point to teachers who are fresh out of school, and I would specifically point to law enforcement. I think those are 2 industries that could benefit from this model, with the idea being that it is not a long-term solution. You are not asking a teacher or someone in law enforcement or a first responder to live in somebody's home forever. You've probably certainly got dreams and aspirations of your own, but that use it as a stopgap. Again, law enforcement has to go through an academy process that can take 6, 8, 12 months, depending on what kind of training that they're going for. During that time, they are paid, but they are not paid a lot. They have no extra time. And wouldn't it be a great benefit if you could connect them with local families who, again, are supportive of law enforcement, would be in a good position to be a good candidate for that, and can really provide that open entree into the community. Because the reality is that it not only solves for some of the workforce issues and the housing issues that we're seeing, particularly in Northern Virginia, where you and I are, but this is not unique across the country. There is a huge shortage of workforce housing and attainable housing, and sort of that whole process all the way through. There's just not enough inventory. And so it would solve for that, at least in the short term. And it would also help people be able to take a job elsewhere in the country where they may not know anybody, and really get sort of endeared into the community in that way, that they live with a local family, they understand, the local culture and conversation that's happening. And they're better able to serve their communities at the end of this. And the same is true of teachers as well. So, I do think, kind of put that in the municipal column, that I think, for these communities that are struggling to pay their community leaders and servants better, I think that would be a nice stopgap. Another option, and I know you and I talked about this in the past, is there are local companies who have really done good work to have their headquarters and their workforce housing, whether that's a factory or let me say that part again. That there are companies that have been able to connect the dots between where their workforce lives and where the job site is. And so that can be anything. It can be a manufacturing job. It can be sort of industrial in that regard. It can be construction. It can be different things like that, but are either providing dedicated transportation to and from the job. And that can come in the form of, we've seen this in cities for a long time where they get their bus fares or their metro fares or their parking paid for. But what they're actually doing in some of these cases, particularly in the suburbs, is running buses back and forth, getting their workforce to live in areas where, perhaps they own an apartment complex. And so that they can have workforce come in and just kind of live there, that they can provide them an easy, point to point transportation system that makes the process of them living far away from the job site much more attainable and possible. You can also use, I think more robust public transportation networks for that. But again, that's a little bit of a bigger conversation. I think as much as an employer, as much of that part of the process as you can control, that's going to be to your benefit.
So have you seen this work in any of the organizations you've come across?
So the second part of it, not specifically. I do know of some organizations in right here in Loudoun County that had done something like that, but that it actually became, I guess, cost prohibitive to be able to run the transportation in the way that they wanted to. So I still think, even though that company has since ended the program of kind of running the bus back and forth between where the workforce lives and where they are, I still think it's possible elsewhere. And so I'll give a little bit more of the details behind what they were doing. So they are an industrial manufacturing company, and they did not have their workforce clustered necessarily, but what they figured out is that most of their workforce lived in a tight enough geographic area, about 40 minutes away from where their job site was. And so what they would do is, they were running 3 8-hour shifts around the clock in their location. And so what they would do is just run a bus 24 hours a day as well, and just pop it back and forth. And so if you were, obviously the main points of turnover would be in going into a shift and coming out of a shift. But I think they would also run some buses in between in case somebody had an emergency at home or, got sick or something like that, to where they would not be stranded in one location or the other. So it was a really innovative solution. And I do know that one of the things that has popped up in the last few years that, sort of skyrocketing rates is that it is much more expensive to hire buses and drivers, with the cost of fuel, with the cost of the drivers, with the cost of maintenance and things like that. So these are all things that need to be taken into consideration. But I do think that if you're living in a very expensive area and your workforce is, you can't command the rate for them to live locally, it's something that you have to think about. And this is, I would say, particularly in the Northern Virginia bubble, that this is something that affects people who are making sums of money that you wouldn't imagine would still be facing the economic crunch that we're all kind of in right now. So I think it's a time to be very creative with all of these considerations, and at least figure out how you can help connect the dots for people.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you brought that up. There are really great solutions and really great approaches. And sometimes, they sort of reach their limit in terms of available resources to continue them, and some of the challenges that people continue to face, with just, again, resourcing. So I'm glad that you brought that up, because one of the things, and I don't know if you've noticed this, but one of the things I come across often really is there's this lack of knowledge about programs that are already existing that can help solve for some of these challenges that folks are facing, especially, organizations are again trying to prioritize which initiative they're trying to solve for and what they can actually put the bulk of their resources into. I oftentimes, encourage them to explore some of the available resources that already exist in the community. A lot of times there are, and they're just not widely known. Have you had experience with that? What are your thoughts around that? I know that you worked for economic development, and I have found that there is a lot of opportunities for folks to educate themselves more on what's available to them?
Absolutely. So just to give people a little bit of a background on economic development, that's, this is something that has worked for a long time, either as a function of local and state level government, or as sort of a third party, in some communities, that's the Chamber of Commerce or something like that, where the idea is to bring jobs to town is essentially the directive there. So, economic development for years and years has been measured based on the square footage of new commercial development, or industrial development, the number of new jobs created, the investment dollars from the company flowing into the community and things like that. Something that really changed even before COVID, in many communities, particularly ones with a very tight jobs market, is this idea that we can bring both the companies, the organizations that are hiring, the employers and the employees, the workforce talent piece of that to communities. And the backdrop for this was in Northern Virginia, where the unemployment rate was sub 3%. I am not probably conversant enough on all of the economic development best practices today, but at the time, one thing that people would say is that we're really aiming for about 5% unemployment. So why so high? The reality is that people will flow in and out of the workforce as it goes, and that 5% is usually enough to where a company can come in and hire pretty easily, and that people can change jobs pretty easily. When you get down to 2.5%, you're talking about there just not being the people that you need. And so if you're building, especially certain industries, so data centers are a great example in Northern Virginia, you're seeing companies just cannibalize each other constantly. And that's very good if you're an employee. You can advance very quickly in your career. You can get pay bumps all the time. You can probably work some other perks and really make it a great lifestyle for you. And I don't think the data center industry would begrudge you for that. But the reality is that they really needed to get more talent inserted into that. So from an economic development perspective, it was a great opportunity to collect resources first. So what you mentioned is really recognizing all of the things that were out there. And so I'll just give you a quick example. One of the big ones in working for a county government entity, which is what Loudoun Economic Development is that you had direct peer access to the Department of Transportation. And so when they're looking at bus routes and things like that between point to point, you can say, okay, we're going to have a major development over here that, the commercial space is already rented out, and we're going to need workforce to have access to this in Metro. And so you can work directly with their team to say, okay, we're going to run buses here on, every 15 minutes back and forth to the Metro. And that's a great thing for somebody who is considering locating their business in a community to have that type of access. And so I think, Loudoun Economic Development in that regard was a very good handshake to these different organizations. Another one is the Workforce Development Center. You would think that would be under economic development. It's not. For whatever reason, it's under the Department of Housing. And so, it really is interesting, the value that communities can have in sort of having a no wrong door policy, that somebody comes in and says, hey, I'm looking for this thing. Do you do that? That the answer is not no, but it's who does. And, the other piece of that is branching out, obviously, beyond government as well, and bringing in institutions of higher learning, whether that's community colleges, universities, different things like that, to think not only in terms of 2-year and 4-year degrees, but also certificate programs. How can you get people very quickly from the point of consideration to being qualified for a job? And so, I think one thing that we consistently found, and this was true no matter whether it was as well of a resourced organization as Amazon, or it was a business that was still, signing its founding paperwork, no matter what it was, you can't keep track of all of the resources that are out there. And so you need people who are in the role that economic development played in Loudoun County to say, yes, we have that resource. Let me connect you with this person. And so there are amazing people in that particular organization. I will shout out Nancy Ivanko, who we both know, who is just one of the most knowledgeable people that you can possibly know as a business owner, not only for the ecosystem. We talked about sort of that broad picture and the trends that you're seeing, but also really just sitting down with a business owner saying, what do you need? Here are the 6 people I can connect you with on that topic.
Yeah. So it sounds like that's definitely an opportunity for all business owners, is just to get to know the resources that are available to them, starting with economic development, also the Chamber of Commerce. I would even add, industry associations are a really great resource, as well as nonprofits. I think a lot of times, organizations are partnering with nonprofits in ways that it's so beneficial and so, impactful for the nonprofit. But there's just a lot of really great work also being done in terms of developing skill sets, upskilling, individuals, and helping to create those employment pipelines for industries. So it's really, again, to your point, some of the best folks to reach out to find out who those nonprofits are is, again, resources like economic development offices, because they're going to have a really good pulse on what's going on in the community. So I think that's a great way of looking at that. So we've touched on a lot of, different practical steps that organizations can take to establish, really strong programs, whether, they're seeking to market, to a larger, talent pool, or they're, wanting to recruit, specific folks for different jobs. It's pretty easy to see how workforce development is an ocean. And I have found that it is defined in many different ways by different people, depending on where they're, sort of situated in that ecosystem. So how do you define it after, our conversation today?
It's such a great question. And I had some time to think about this, but if I was going to distill this down to one word, it's trust. And it is the thing that is most essential to workforce development. And you can look at it through any lens, again, whether that's the conversations that you're having internally within a boardroom, the conversations that you're having with your existing workforce, the workforce you want to have, the community at large. It all boils down to trust. It's not only are you putting a good message out there, but do people actually believe it? And I think if you can ensure that second piece of it, then you're going to succeed in the workforce development game, because like I said, everyone knows right now it is a tough game out there to hire and retain the staff that you need. But as long as people believe that you are trying to do good and you are acting in good faith, I think everyone wins. So I would put it as one word: trust.
I love that. So if, for, our listeners, what is the one thing you want them to walk away from in terms of the messaging, to establish that trust? What is the one thing that they can do today to start working on that?
I think even if an organization is listening to this and not in that triage situation, they don't have a crisis, they're fully staffed, everyone seems happy. The good maintenance that you can do, because again, sort of preventative medicine here, is I would always seek to have that open dialogue with your existing staff and really focus on gauging their wants, their needs, their satisfaction with things over time. And again, going back to it being a trust-based conversation, is that if they truly need something and that there's something that is just, it's that little thing that nags at them every day. It's the little piece of something that could be fixed with technology, with another hire, with some additional learning and development, which we didn't even really get into today. But, what are the pieces that you can do to be a problem solver for that person? And again, if you do that and you can sort of maintain and prevent problems, then you will be, leagues ahead of your competitors, no matter what you're trying to accomplish from a workforce development perspective. And so it really starts with earnestly listening and, to the degree that you can, really measuring, and looking for trends over time. So one of the things that I definitely recommend for an organization that is in a good place is make sure that you have sort of an annual double-blind survey, where nobody is going to be, trust but verify, right? But, no one is going to be punished for their negative takes on something, but it's a great opportunity to force people into the position of really thinking about their own happiness and what they need and the resources that they have, and then follow that up on an annual basis. If you are an organization that is in trouble and knows it, then I would probably double or even quadruple the amount of touch points that you're having in that regard. So, be willing to measure, be willing to take negative or critical feedback, and really put yourself in the best position to prevent problems from happening in the first place.
I think that's solid advice. Well, Brian, you're an incredible resource, and I know that there are tons of other questions that we can, talk for days about. But so how can people reach out to you if they would like to just, get your insight or support with their, initiatives, either workforce development or marketing?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I do wear several hats with my organization, which we didn't go too deep into. POUNCE Solutions is, yeah. So POUNCE Solutions is, again, we're calling ourselves a marketing and communications firm, but, with the expectation that those things touch on all aspects of an organization. It's the way that people interact with other people. And so we are interested in that from a, marketing to your clients, marketing to your workforce, marketing to your board. A lot of organizations, are very happy and successful. The worst relationship is between their executive director and their board chair. We see that all the time. So, it can be a very targeted relationship like that you're trying to influence, or something where you are looking to just get your brand, elevate your brand in terms of visibility, awareness, and getting people to take action. So, what we have found is that people are most likely to respond to other people instead of brands, and that people respond best to stories instead of facts. And so, if you feel like there's any piece of your story that is not getting you the results that you want, feel however you feel about the talking points and the descriptions that you have. But at the end of the day, everyone is results oriented, and so are we. So is it getting you the action that you want to hire the people that you want to hire in a workforce development lens, and keep the people that you have there and happy? Let us know. We are always happy to come in and have that conversation, make recommendations. Going back to my first example, sometimes it is just a marketing issue. Sometimes your inability to hire is just because you're not taking advantage of, the LinkedIn algorithm, or posting in the right way on Indeed, or contacting your local workforce development resource center. So it can be a simple answer, but if it's not, we're happy to give you an honest assessment on that, and that it's not, hey, this is not a marketing issue. Let's dig a little deeper. So we always look forward to those conversations. And please go to pouncesolutions.com and feel free to fill out a contact form there. We'll get back to you usually within about a day, and would be happy to consider whatever are the things that you have already identified as an issue. We'll be happy to get to the middle of it and be problem solvers for you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Brian. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Daisy. This has been awesome. And I look forward to hearing this and all the other great insights that you're going to get from other people.
Oh, I can't wait. And that brings us to the end of today's episode. A huge thanks to Brian for joining us and sharing such valuable insights on the power of brand storytelling and workforce development. One of the biggest takeaways from this conversation is that workforce development isn't just about training and hiring. It's about how we tell our story. The way organizations communicate their values, culture, and opportunities plays a crucial role in attracting and retaining the right talent. If people don't know who you are and what you stand for, they won't engage with your mission. Now, before you go, here are 3 key takeaways that you can put into action after listening to this episode. Plus, stay tuned until the end for an exclusive preview of our next episode featuring Dwayne Douglas, CEO of Quill. Number 1, access your brand story. How is your organization presenting itself to potential employees in the community? Are you clearly communicating your mission, values, and workforce initiatives? Number 2, engage in authentic communication. Workforce development starts from within. Build trust by ensuring your internal messaging aligns with your external brand. Employees are your best ambassadors, so make sure that they believe in the story you're telling. Number 3, leverage community resources. One of my favorites. Workforce development is a collective effort, so partner with your local economic development organizations, workforce boards, and industry associations to amplify your impact. And if you need help refining your brand story and promoting your workforce development initiatives, Brian is an incredible resource. So reach out to him for expert guidance on marketing strategy, communication planning, and storytelling. Well, that's it for today. So if you found this episode helpful, make sure to share it with your network and join the conversation. And don't forget to subscribe to PATHIRED for more conversations on building a thriving workforce. Until next time, keep learning, keep innovating, and keep telling your story.
My background is in IT and telecom. For the past, 25 years, I've been doing that work. I live out in the suburbs of Chicago and in Naperville, Illinois. I'm from the city of Chicago, born on the west side in North Lawndale. So when I was down visiting there in 2017, I was talking with family members, actually. And my family member was trying to share pictures with me on their phone, or I was trying to share them with them. And they pulled out a flip phone. So then, of course, I pulled out my iPhone, I think it's a 10 at the time. And I said, well, I can't share pictures on your flip phone. So asked them where their device, where their computer was, asked them if they had a printer. They had none of those. And then I asked if they had internet. And then she said to me, or asked me, what do I need that for? And so in 2017, I found that to be, it kind of, it paused me, because it wasn't so much as affordability or having a device that was concerned. It was just a question of, why do I need that?
Right, especially 2017.
Yeah, so this is pre-COVID, right? So, and I was unaware that that thought would even exist. I understood affordability and devices and digital literacy. I didn't understand, the individuals didn't understand why they needed it. So what I did was I came back home and I started to research around the country to see if this was a prevalent thought, only to find out that not only was it a prevalent thought, it was everywhere, right? In every community that looked like those communities in which I came from.